So this is a second and two-part series looking at the end of the Montreal Canadiens Dynasty. Now, we talked in the previous one about the 79-80 season, and today we're going to expand on that and talk about the 1980-81 campaign. Now, this was a very interesting year for Montreal because a lot of people felt the bump in the road of 1980 was just that, because the end of the regular season on a high note. They only lost one of their last 27 home games, which was one of the best home records in actually modern history. They were led by a very strong contingent of goal scorers. They had multiple 20-goal scorers and many players over 10 goals. Steve Shutt had a great season for him points-wise, 35 goals, 38 assists. Mark Napier, a WHA graduate, was second in scoring with 71 points. But with the season, the difficulty came with the injury to Guy Lafleur. Lafleur only played in 51 games that season with a respectable 27 goals and 43 assists. But what really stood out on the campaign was the rise of goal scoring from Mario Tremblay and Réjean Houle. Réjean Houle was a Montreal Canadiens prospect that was cast off years before to the Quebec Nordiques and then came back, and he had a really good season. 27 goals for Réjean Houle. That was pretty good for a second, third line player. Yvon Lambert as well had a great year, 22 goals. In a limited time, Pierre LaRouche had 25 in 61 games. So it was a very potent offense. But again, the problem with that year was the decision by management to not prepare for the future. And in the previous podcast, I talked about the quartet of Habs goalies. And this year, again, we had the big four: Michel Larocque, Richard Sevigny, Denny Herron, and Rick Walmsley. Most of them could be best considered backups. Now, here's what's really bizarre. Sevigny, Larocque, and Herron shared a Vezina trophy for best average. And there was one time that Claude Ruel was putting in the goalies to make them reach that 25 game mark. Now, the most bizarre thing this year is when Richard Sevigny had his best statistical season of all time with 20 wins, 4 losses, and 3 ties. No, but everybody was kind of wondering if this was the season that Montreal was going to come back. But get this, ladies and gentlemen, if you're under the age of 25, you wouldn't remember this, and maybe your dad or grandparents would never talk about this. At the time, the NHL had a 1 versus 16 system, which means their number one team in the league would play 16, number 2 would play 15, and so on and so on. The divisional championship series only started next year with the rise of the rivalries, especially in Montreal's division, between the Nordiques and the Habs, and the reignited rivalry between Hartford and Quebec. Divisional play was more, predominant. But this season, ironically, Montreal had home ice advantage against, of all teams, the Wayne Gretzky-led Edmonton Oilers. Now, this was before the Grand Fewer years. Andy Moog was the starting goalie. Now, Richard Sevigny, getting my Montreal Canadiens players mixed up for a second. Richard Sevigny said before the series that Lafleur would put Gretzky, or the Canadiens would put Gretzky in their back pocket. Well, the opening game, Sevigny was put in Gretzky's back pocket. Multiple point performance. He could have had 7 points that game, and he really dominated. Showed the age of the Canadiens. And see, the big problem in Montreal in the early 80s, they'd be great in the regular season, but as soon as the playoffs would hit, they would not be motivated to hold the lead or take the lead. Now, Richard Sevigny is not a number one goalie. He's not overpowering. I met him before, and the first thing he told me, he said, being a goalie of his height, I think he was 5'8" or 5'9", 6 feet on skates for sure. But he wasn't an imposing goalie. He was sort of like Don Edwards style, but he was more flamboyant. He was a interpretive goalie, as we say. Now, game 2, Moog had another great performance, and he went back to Edmonton. It was shocking to see, because a lot of the fans in the crowd were cheering for Montreal, but as the game went on, the Oiler dynasty that really started to rise started with that series. We all know that Edmonton lost a couple of series to the Islanders in the playoffs before they bet them in the final. We know they had a bad series against LA, where LA was the underdog, and the infamous Gary Younger penalty led to that big comeback from the 5-0 for the Kings. But at the time, we had no idea how good Gretzky could be until he played against a player of a similar caliber. Now, Lafleur always had respect for Gretzky, played in the Canada Cup later on, and he said in published reports that really they needed an inspiration to make it into the next round, and beating Montreal gave him that momentum. Because, Edmonton wasn't really fully stacked at the time. Some of their young defensemen were still learning, a lot of the WHA cast-offs. Messier wasn't Messier yet. He was still learning his goal scoring prowess. But in the next 2 or 3 years, when Gretzky really started to open up those, the 92 goal season, the breaking 200 points, it all stems back to games against the Maple Leafs in his first season, and this series against Montreal, where basically he found his feet. And he was still a young man at the time. He was early 20s, if that. So if you're wondering why Montreal didn't really recover from the early 80s until 84, we all know what happened in 82, losing in overtime to the Nordiques, which was no surprise. Nordiques always overplayed Montreal, never played against anybody else. 83 to loss to the Buffalo. You only got momentum back towards the Stanley Cup when all those rookies came in, 85, 86, Richer, all the young stars. And something, not saying it's a lost era to the Montreal Canadiens, but if you look at the statistics during the season and in the regular season play and with all the great players they had, you'll wonder how come he didn't do more in the playoffs. Well, he didn't have the killer instinct. Guy Lapointe was getting older. Serge Savard was not in the equation. Robinson was getting older. Shutt, Lafleur, everybody else. See, old soldiers don't die. They just fade. And the Montreal Canadiens, the ghost of the Forum, couldn't do enough in the playoffs for him anymore. If anything, the ghost of the Forum took up for Gretzky in the final because, John Beliveau kind of met Gretzky years before and kind of christened him as the next big thing. It was destined that Edmonton would win against Montreal somehow, and here you had it. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you like the two-parter, please let me know. Leave a comment. Please subscribe or give a like. And if you didn't like it, please don't tell your friends because, if you don't like something, why would you say you don't like something? It's better to keep it yourself. So, on this pre-storm New Year's Eve, I wish you Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. And as we say in Wayne Gretzky's Hockey Bible, I got my own puck, get your own. Have a good one. Bye.